Okay, so kia ora, mai haere mai, and welcome this evening on behalf of Gisborne District Council here to coming along to this presentation, or whether you're watching or listening online to our discussion around Let's Talk Rates, as well as having time to answer any questions you may have. So tonight we're going to share with you why the Council has reviewed the rating system, why those changes are being proposed, what the changes are, and also what impact they would have on ratepayers within Tairawhiti if they are adopted. So this will then, like I said, be followed by time for Q&A, and if you'd like a cup of tea, help yourself during the session, or of course at the end, you're welcome to stay and have a chat with us too. If you haven't done so already, GDC have got a website, Let's Talk Rates. It's a repository of information with all the rating proposal changes. And it's also got a rates tool on there, which I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity to look at. So this rates tool's been developed so that each ratepayer can go on there, type in their property address, valuation number off their rates assessment form, and see how these proposed changes would specifically impact them. It compares it to the 2019-2020 rates valuation. And why that is because when the modelling started, the 2020-21 rates had not been set at that point in time. The other things just to be mindful of is when you're using that rating tool is that there's still a few things to be overlaid by July 21 next year when the proposed changes would come in place if they're adopted, and that would be the property rating revaluations. So that's currently underway and expected to be near completion towards the end of this year. The other thing there is any long-term plan adoption, which Council is now just starting to start engagement on that too. So that could have some influence. And the third thing there is just all figures on that rates tool are GST exclusive. So just bear those three things in mind. If your rates are going to go up or down, we really want to have that feedback and for you to tell us whether you agree with that or not. There's a couple of different ways that you can go about doing that. Tonight is a part of receiving that feedback from you, getting questions answered that you may have, but also we have submission forms which you can do online as well, asking if you agree or disagree with the changes and your thoughts. And those submissions will be collated and then presented to the wider councillor group. We've got tablets here tonight, happy to sit with you afterwards and make an online submission if you'd like to do that before you leave this evening. So before we start, I will just ask Ree if she could kindly say a mihi for us, and then we will carry on.
Kia ora kōrua, and the two that are online. Kia ora tātou kua hui mai nei, ki tēnei wahi. So thank you for coming and gathering here in this place, virtually or physically, to kōrero ngā kaupapa or kōrero re te tātou, Let's Talk Rates. It's really awesome that you've come. Ka nui te haere mō tō koutou kaingako. It's awesome to have your interest here. It's great to have you attending to discuss the issues i ngā take of this area, e pā ana ki tēnei rohe. So thank you again. It's great to have you online and physically. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, katoa. Kia ora.
Thanks, Ree. So we did some introductions before, but for those of you online, I will introduce the members of the team who are here this evening with us. So from the Finance and Revenue team, we've got Pauline Foreman, Chief Financial Officer, Fiona Scragg, the Revenue Team Leader, and Joe is sitting at the end, who's part of strategic planning. Over to this side here, we have Ree, who is our executive advisor, and Berta, the revenue accountant, and my name is Kyla, and I'm the facilitator this evening. As I mentioned, at the end of the presentation, there'll be time for Q&As. For the people online, if you have questions as the presentation proceeds, please email us at feedback@gdc.gov.nz and we can answer those questions throughout the course of the evening also. I will need to ask you to speak into a microphone for those physically here in the room with us, and that's purely just so the people online can hear your questions as well. Otherwise it sounds very far away in the distance. So what has prompted the review? There's been two key drivers. One has been regarding community feedback as to how rates are allocated in the region. And the other one is that it does form a part of the council's long-term planning process. So every 3 years, we review how we fund activities, and we're partway through that process. So we started many months ago looking at firstly, developing a set of guiding principles, and that was developed in order to give consideration to the funding options as we went through. From here, we then looked at who is paying, identified options where we considered changes could be made, and modelled those changes to see how they impact individual property rates. Now, as the review was progressing, three key themes began to emerge, and the changes being proposed relate to those three themes. So we're now at the point where we're engaging with the community and we're seeking community feedback regarding the proposed changes. So you've heard enough from me to take you through those three key themes and the proposed changes. I'm going to hand you across to the team for Pauline, Fiona and Joe to speak to them.
Oh my goodie, we are. Oh, look at this. How are you? How are you? Well, I'm going to sit in the crowd here.
Hello. Oh, that's right, it's just us. Oh, it's very good to have you here. Thanks, Kyla, with regards to that introduction. Just as Kyla said, we're required every 3 years by law to review how we fund activities. And this review actually went back to basics. It looked at the principles and then it also tried to align with our 30-year strategic objectives, which was outlined in the Te Rāwhiti 250 spatial plan. Some of the new principles that was identified throughout this process was that, firstly, all funding options will consider affordability. Funding choices will support the outcomes of Te Rāwhiti 250. Each generation should pay for the services that they receive. Revenue collection will be obvious, transparent, efficient, simple, and consistent. Actions and inactions that adversely affect the community, the environment, or council's assets can expect to pay more. Users of services can expect to contribute to the cost of operating the service. From this, it was identified that there were areas within the current rating system that were no longer fit for purpose, or actually didn't align to the new principles, or there were inconsistencies with other rates. The review showed that there were three main issues. The first one is the principle of affordability, or the ability to pay rates. Our current rating system has a high proportion of fixed rates, meaning everybody pays the same. This impacts low-income households more than it does higher. Effectively, this is a regressive tax like GST, where tax is applied uniformly, taking a larger percentage of tax from the low-income earners than it does for the higher. Each ratepayer is charged the same amount rather than the ability to pay. The second issue was regards road maintenance and who should pay. Currently, the level of forest harvesting and the increased usage of heavy vehicles on our roading network means that council is actually spending more of its roading budget on repairing and renewing roads used by forestry sector than it has before. And the last issue is around infrastructure maintenance and who should pay. We refer to the infrastructure as water supply, wastewater, and stormwater. And stormwater is the water that runs off the water-resistant surfaces such as the roads, the roofs, the driveways, and the footpaths. The runoff goes down the drains into the stormwater pipes or channels and then carries out to the nearest waterway. So with this, there are 5 main changes proposed on how we allocate rates. It should be noted that the changes doesn't mean we collect more rates. We still collect the same amount, but what it does, it changes how it's reallocated. First one is the general rate. This is to recognise the public good component, where some of the cost of these services can't be attributed to a particular group of users. The changes also address consistency about how we rate other rates. The roading rate is the changes that with more cost been set to recover from the forestry sector to meet the costs that have been identified from repairing the damaged roads. The wastewater allocation is only for those that are connected. So if you have your own system, you won't be affected by this. So it's only within the reticulated city services that is there. And this is the lion's share of the rates. We're looking with those ones. Stormwater, that's a little bit changing a way that we previously did from a fixed rate per service property to a household, but there is a slight change to the boundary as well. And the boundary has extended a little bit around the city just to match the urban sprawl, which has gone a little bit from the increase of residential and lifestyle blocks around there. So that this one sees a little bit of an increase from people that weren't on there before, but we'll go into more details about that shortly. And the last one is removing the city centre management and promotion rate. So this here is trying to give an indication of where the sectors have been reallocated with regards to the rates. In the forestry sector, the horticultural, pastoral, and the commercial and industrial have gone up, and then the residential sector has gone down. But most of the changes that we see on there is arising from the reallocation of the roading rate and how that's collected, with more coming from the forestry sector. This reallocation of the forestry rate, in effect, reduces some of the subsidising that the residential ratepayer occurs with the current rating system. And what I mean by that is that residential, the urban ratepayers pays about 60% of the network cost, but are only contributing to about 20 to 30% of the wear and tear. Sure. For those may not pick that up on the speakers for the listening in, it was asking if you add all those up, the increases doesn't eat the decrease. But effectively what is not on that part is the removal of the city centre management rate. And so when you take that into account, that's the ups and the downs. Because that's about 180. Yes, that's right, exactly. So the general rate. So with a general rate, the rate is applied generally, meaning that every ratepayer pays. This is obviously opposed to a targeted rate, which targets a group of ratepayers. The main changes are that 10% of costs for water supply, wastewater and stormwater will be collected generally. Currently, stormwater is at 20% of a general rate application, but for consistency, it is proposed to reduce it down to 10%. In addition, the maintenance cost currently rated for the coastal maintenance is proposed to be a part of a general rate. The cost for these activities is consistent with how we rate activities that benefit the whole community. Also, it supports the principle of affordability for low incomes, pay more. So why the changes? The current rating system doesn't actually recognise the benefit provided to the whole community by the delivery of the Free Waters infrastructure, and that's inconsistent with other activities. These benefits include improving and maintaining the water quality, protecting water bodies and coastal waters that have important ecosystems, recreational and cultural values, and are moving towards a more efficient and sustainable use of fresh water. This recognition of benefits is also supported by central government's recent water reforms, where the emphasis is on how wastewater, water supply and stormwater will be managed and provided to all communities. It is appropriate for general rates to partially fund activities where there is a provision of a private good, but also generates wider social and cultural benefits, or when there's an application of fees and charges that causes affordability issues, or it compromises the wider objectives of the activity. And this is consistent with the guiding principle of affordability. So what else do we do? Do we do it elsewhere? Yes. Essentially, the two main flood control schemes have already 6% a general rate, and the rivers and asset management have 100% general rate. What you could say is that those closest to the rivers for the flood protection, they receive the most protection. But it's always been recognised that there is economic and environmental wellbeing benefits for the whole community, such as reducing the impact of flooding, hence a general rate component. So the forestry sector. So within the forestry sector, there's two things. We increase the amount that is collected from the forestry roading rate. Currently it is a 7.5 differential to a 10. And then it's also changing the definition of forestry for rating purposes. Currently, what we call for rating purposes, we say it's a forestry is where the exotic forest land is the highest and best use of land on any one individually owned property. But where you've got perhaps horticulture and pastoral, where the forestry blocks of 20 or more hectares, they will be now captured as part of the differential for that part of the land, not all of it, but only that part that is considered the forestry block. Under this, it affects about 139 properties, and currently the upper range is 1,700 hectares of forestry, which previously wasn't captured under the differential, to the lowest, obviously, which is the limit at the minimus at the moment is 20 hectares. Yes.
How do we get to the 20 hectare?
Yeah, so there's two things. So originally it was asked from the independent valuer what they considered as a minimum viable unit. And at that stage they indicated that it would be 20 hectares. But it is an option that when you can consider it, is it more 50 hectares? And so part of the consultation is to say, does that increase to maybe a de minimis of 50 hectares, because you might have in cumulative 50 hectares of it, but they might be in small pockets and they're not really viable for commercially. So that part of that is about out to the community, and actually can say, what are your feedbacks with regards to those?
Can I ask a question?
Certainly.
You've got a great address and there's a lot of detail you're actually giving us this evening. But we've got two properties bound by forestry right round, pastoral properties, with access with council roads. So I haven't seen any detail around our particular situation, but that would encompass our rates to be risen because of that particular road and service that you're going to give to our properties?
Sorry.
As we're neighbours of forestry and we use those roads, are we actually going to be increased?
No. So it's only if you've got forestry block on your land.
Yep. Okay.
So if you, on your property block that's over, at the moment says 20 hectares, but if you have got no blocks of land that, or forestry, exotic forestry of that, you won't be impacted by it. Okay. Even if there are neighbouring owners, they will be rated for it if they do come under that of it, but otherwise no, if you don't, you won't be impacted by it.
Right, thank you. Yep.
So in terms of this, is just to give you an indication why we say different rates. We say the forestry says that they have a differential, which means they pay 7.5 as opposed to a residential property pays one time. And it's based on the impacts of the vehicles to the road. And this is just to show on this particular graph that these are the number of tonnes transported per year, millions of on the roads, and it shows the difference between the horticultural and the forestry impacts. And that's why we come with additional information of reviewing the actual impacts of the roads, but this shows the impacts with a different sector and why they've got a lower in relation to forestry. So I'm just going to click, oops, going too fast, sorry. That's Joe's.
This is my one slide, but I'll be brief. So we did also look at some other options for funding roading maintenance. One, of course, being the status quo. So under this, that forestry differential stays at 7.5, which means that those non-forestry rating categories, such as your pastoral, your horticultural, residential, continue to fund some of that damage that we know is directly attributable to the forestry industry because of the logging trucks, and don't receive a reduction in their rates. We did look at other rating options too. So we looked at, could we split the roading rates based on urban and rural ratepayers and the use of the network? But it was decided that doesn't reflect the roading network and the way that we need the network to work as a whole for it to be efficient and work for the whole region. So that was discounted too. Then we looked at other non-rating options. So that included financial contributions, which could be imposed as part of a resource consent process. For example, when a landowner applies to harvest their trees, if they need a resource consent, or some kind of heavy vehicle levy that we could impose by way of a bylaw. And that could be based on the frequency of truck movements or the weight or some combination of that or the distance travelled. So while both those options have merit, neither of them are straightforward. They have to go through their own legal processes and require further consultation, hearings, submissions, hearings, and decision making. So they are still being looked at, but we haven't adopted either of those options at this point in time. But we're still looking to them because in the future they could provide a way to generate some additional investment in our roading network to raise the standard of the roads and provide a service that the heavy vehicles need to get freight moving around the region more efficiently. And we also did look at the fuel tax option, but under the current legislation, that's not something we can adopt at the moment.
Just on forestry, it's an observation where we're farming that abuse is happening to the roads when adverse weather comes. It's as though it's of right for heavy vehicle access. Back in the day, and when I first started farming, in the old council arrangements, if there was an amount of rain, heavy vehicles weren't allowed to go on the roads. A road that at the moment, it's got a lot of activity right past us, and we're the only farm up there's a Waiau Road, for example. Those guys, they abuse the privilege of actually having access to those roads. If they can't get their big transporters up the road, they'll unload at a woolshed. I've witnessed it for their big heavy haulers, their crawlers, and just go up the road, the council road. And I'm thinking, well, who's actually policing all this? They only have to have a couple of those vehicles get to go up there, and all that hard work that's actually been done in preparation is just trashed. So I'd like to, and I see Federated Farmers have actually come aboard in a statement with the heavy traffic bypass. It's a bully boy approach. The feeling is that, and I agree, I'm not anti-forestry, it's good for our country to hold it together, but at the end of the day, I really believe there should be some sort of policy around of what happens at certain times of the year. Like North America, like, I know I'm going off the beat, or North America or Northern Europe, they don't harvest during the winter months, or a time when weather actually upsets infrastructure. So I think we should be going towards that situation. At the moment, we're blessed with all this provincial growth fund money. there's just meters and meters and meters of gravel going on. Great, but look, it's not going to last.
About 14 months ago, it got wet. I had a tenant in a house who lost his job. The council actually closed the roads down for 3 weeks because of the wet weather. So it's in their power to do that.
This discussion at our last regional transport where councillors did ask this of David Wilson, and he did say that some of the roads they do are saying to forestry companies, during wintertime, if you want to harvest that time of year, you will have to take over the maintenance of the road because as a council, we just cannot justify it. So I think, Peter, those discussions will happen more and more where we can't justify keeping roads open always if the damage has been done in those wet weather events. So I'm sure those type of discussions will happen more and more.
But not only, we're actually farming on unstable country, and you may not get the effect of that heavy traffic at that adversity. It just creates vibration, slumping, and you have to have a observation up the way I rode at the moment, how the road's actually fallen into the river. And that's just come from heavy vibration when the ground has been at its probably weakest point. So, and then the other thing is a situation like that, it doesn't get fixed up. It's got to have resource consents and all the red tape that goes to get that compliance. If you fix up something quickly, the cost is not so great. It's like us fixing up a fence. If there's 2 or 3 broken posts, you put the posts in to retain the fence. Otherwise, the rest of the fence comes under strain and the whole fence needs doing. And that seems to be an observation that's been happening around our whole catchment. And I can't really sort of, 5 years ago before we got this last property, believe what I was been witnessing with the heavy traffic. And I really believe some of the council staff should get out there and actually drive around these roads when that adverse weather is happening and just have these observations. We're living and breathing it, but it doesn't seem to be coming back and being recorded back into this office.
And I will take that on to with Dave Wilson as well, but I know that they have been quick, especially with some of the areas, but maybe to close the roads because it's going to be adverse and will affect the validity of the road. But as we go through the LTP process and we've got constraints about the levels of service, and then there will be options. What are the things that we can do? Has their sort of management of those things and part of the areas, is it to close those roads during that time when it's adverse? So those kind of things will be discussed as we go through the long-term plan and talking about the funding and options and what else can we do. But we will bring that back as well. So, okay, the connected wastewater rate. So if you've got your own sewage system, it won't affect you. So it's basically within the city. And when we talked about the first 10% of rates for a general rate, it's basically 90% is will be charged within the city boundary. And it was looking at the way that we currently distributed or allocated the rates within the city. And what it had 2 rates, if you like. There was a water connection, a wastewater connection rate, and then was another rate that was for a wastewater pan rate or the toilet rate. And those 2, current one was originally set up to separate the variable costs of processing the sewage, and then there was a separate one for the fixed cost of the sewage network. So this is now amalgamating them into one. Effectively, that comes out of there is that the households pay the same price, and therefore some of the anomalies that was within their own systems that you would find perhaps a fixed charge of one household may have been paying the same fixed charge as what up to 170 units at a retirement area. So it's trying to look at that and get the approximation back on track. And this is also consistent with the other, all three rates of how they actually look as per household. I'll pass it over to Fiona, she can talk the examples.
What we have up here is an example of how we currently rate wastewater. We have a uniform connection rate for the supply of wastewater service per property and a toilet pan rate for the supply to the wastewater network. Line 1 is a single household property and line 2 is a single property with 2 households, for example, a set of flats. As you can see, the single household currently contributes more. This is inconsistent with how we rate other infrastructure activities where those who get the same services pay the same price. Yes. And if you've got a large group of properties like a retirement village, if it's 100 properties, then it's 100 times that rate.
Have we specifically spoken to those retirement homes and the hospital?
Yes, I've been out and consulted with them.
So you were, the one before was how, the one before was how we currently have it, and this one is proposing that that approximation of the fixed charges of the network is then spread more evenly amongst those that are using it. And then you can see that the 2 households properties in there is comparable to the 1 household on 1 property. So it's a redistribution of what the impacts are.
So with this change that we are proposing, the 2 wastewater rates would be merged into 1, and the new pan rate would be higher than what the old one is to make sure we're collecting the same amount of money. This change would mean everybody connected to the wastewater network pays the same per household. With residential properties, you only pay for 1 toilet pan, and that is a legislative rule. So if you've got a home that's got a toilet that everyone shares and an ensuite, you still only pay 1 pan charge. This change would increase rates for residential properties with multiple households, like the set of flats, and non-residential properties with multiple toilets, for example, commercial properties and industrial properties, motels, etc.
So would that also affect properties that might have a granny flat on them?
Yes, it would. If it's a granny flat and it's been used by the family or not being used at all, we do have rate remission policies for that people can apply for. Those changes would not affect properties not connected to the wastewater. So if you're on a septic tank, this wouldn't affect you at all.
So stormwater is a little bit similar in some ways. It's changing from per property, per household. But there is a little bit of an extension to what I mentioned before. There is the boundaries of the city has been extended just to align with the actual growth of the residential and lifestyle blocks around the city. So effectively applying the same consistency with all the infrastructure rates, and basically those with the same service to pay the same price.
Was there any consideration for growth, for example, out at Wainui? It's been ongoing that they'd like to be part of the central city sewer and waste. Is that a consideration in the future?
That's part of the, and Dave would be able to know exactly when that occurs. And I know in the last LTP, they considered that about a year 15, which would be at this time, Yeah, I think for when they're doing the major reticulation, yeah, it's further out. It is further out with it, wasn't it? You were
So
doing
it's still in council's mind, but it hasn't yet made a decision about if and when to extend that reticulation. So it's a future decision that council's flag. We need to make this decision, and at the moment we think it will cost X million. That cost is probably going up all the time, but I doubt that they will be making it for this long-term plan. But it will still be flagged in the infrastructure strategy, which looks 30 years ahead, as something that's on the horizon. So that would be sewerage and water supply.
I asked that question for, I understand the long-term plan, but people building now, it's a serious consideration of what services they could draw from the council and what they have to actually put in their plans.
You're right, we just can't say at the moment when and if that reticulation will occur, because obviously that's a serious amount of capital expenditure that council and ratepayers would need to fund. So that's a big discussion to have with the community.
And I think there's also with the wastewater connection, but Dave would be able to explain it a lot more better than what I would be able to. They've got to get the capacity to be able to take that on. And so there are some of the issues that we're working with the drain wise, and obviously the extra work with the equipment, with the second part of the wastewater treatment plant. We get that and see that the connection capacity can take a lot more. But at the moment, we wouldn't be able to have the capacity to be able to take that on without sorting through the first issues.
Wainui, I do know that Makaraka's in the same situation, that where they would also be keen to be reticulated. From that 2008 consultation, I assume that Okitu was included as well.
Because I bike along there, and some of the septic tanks are pretty rich.
And that's how that discussion started in 2008, was looking at some soil contamination there. But the community sometimes, every year that I've gone out there for annual plan consultation, it's still an issue that the community are quite split about. Some are really keen to see reticulation happen there, and some are still really keen not to see reticulation happen there. I mean, every time we've gone out there, it's clear messages from both sides. They really feel strong about doing it or not doing it.
So just talking about the stormwater, these maps that I have here show the boundary of the city, which is around here, where we have a stormwater reticulation system. And we have Wainui and Okitu out here. The orange places pay a full targeted rate for stormwater at the moment per property. This map here is our district, and this is just demonstrating that we have stormwater in some of our rural areas, like Hicks Bay, Tiaroa, Tiki, Ruatoria, Waipira Bay, Tapuia Springs, Tokomare Bay, Tolaga Bay, and then we've got Manatuki, Paratahi, and one of the areas that we want to, or that is proposed to take in, is the Makaraka area around the back of Nelson Road, Matokitoki Valley and Darwin Road, Hetchy Road area. So it's the rural area around the city that is shown here by this purple line, which is what we call DRA 1A, but that doesn't mean anything to anyone. So it's just to demonstrate one of the changes. The areas in blue are our drainage schemes, and there is a relationship between the drainage schemes and stormwater.
It's coming back. I'll just come back with it. The rural areas, they pay 50% of what the charges are within the city, because the city level of service is higher. The second part, the three things that are coming through from the themes that we're hearing at the moment with regards to the stormwater extension is one, that this is a signalling that because the boundaries, if you like, have moved, because there is more residential and lifestyle is encroaching on these areas as we provide those services, and we will need to move with that. And as the review is every 3 years, we need to be able to see what we need to do. So there's two, as I say, there's that as proposed. The second one is that recognising that those extended boundaries the services aren't there yet. So that may be that it's at a 50%, same as what it does, consistency for the rural residential areas. And the third is we don't do it now. So those are the things that we will put when they hear it and when we hear the submission. So it's really important to hear people's feedback and to see what it is. So when the decisions are made, that's all put through to councillors for the decisions. So.
Of, like, say, the rural areas on that side, in order for you to say they're part of our stormwater system, do you have to first do the infrastructure work in order then to charge them the 100%?
Not necessarily. The areas of Wainui and Okatu pay the full targeted stormwater rate. The services are provided at Sponge Bay, and we do have streets even within the city that don't have curb and channel down it, but they still have access to the stormwater. There is still drainage outside their properties, and the stormwater still drains away from their properties.
I'm in Cameron Road, and my water runs just into a farm drain, which hasn't been looked after. I did some breastwork there myself as well, as $2,000. So the council had never done anything to the drain, so I feel reluctant to pay extra rates for all that.
And that's quite right, which is why one of them, some of the areas, the boundary has moved, and so is the infrastructure, but in some of the areas it maybe go beyond what you're receiving now. It may be that it has in 2 or 3 years' time, but you haven't got it now. So the option, one of the proposed options is don't do it now, but it will be signalled that it may need to be reviewed shortly. In a few years or whatever, as the infrastructure grows around those areas.
But I'm still not finished with this one. Good.
So just, yeah, we will take that and we'll put it with the submission with yours, and we will. Oh, wow. Right. But no, we'll put that in, and that's probably the same things when we have different recommendations, when they say for the considerations to council, is to say that probably not now, but it may be a signal that it does need to incur, but there are the three options as to 50%, saying that the service is occurring, and in some areas, some have got it or not. Is it the same as the rural, or alternatively, we don't do it just yet?
One unrelated matter is Cameron Road. It's 100 kilometres an hour down there, and logging trucks go down just for the college, teaching them to drive. Lytton High School run around there, and it's just 80k down the Nelson Road end, and I feel they've probably put the signs in down the wrong end of the road. 100 is far too fast down there for the amount of new buildings that are going in, and every morning there's 20 or 30 people walk around there. There's no footpath, it's mowed in some places, but other places there's branches. They've got to walk around the branch out onto the road to get along, and it's pretty dangerous. It's only a matter of time and someone's going to have an accident there.
I'll comment on that, because I've been coming in and doing the Saturday morning drop-in centre, and we've actually had other people in the same area with the same concerns, so we will definitely be feeding that back to our roading area.
Said to a neighbour, I can take the signs and put them down the other end, but he says, not the best.
Yes, we actually had one other neighbour threaten to rip the signs out and do exactly the same thing.
Just from time to time, council review. I know I live in the Toki Valley and we've got the same issue at this stage. It's a 100-kilometre zone, but someone in our road applied to our roading department, it wasn't me, to take a look at it, and maybe it's more suitable for 80-kilometre roads. So it might be part of that process, just getting Cameron Road in that list of review roads as well, just to take a look at the appropriateness of the.
I know the comment from one of the other people in the area was that there's over 65 houses in Cameron Road in the same length of road on the main highway between Markracker and the Jolly Stockman. There was less, and the limit on the road is less than 100k in that area between Markracker and the Jolly Stockman.
Past the cemetery, it's only 80k, and there's only a few houses on one side, and probably won't bother the other people on the other side too much.
So what we have here is an example of how we currently rate stormwater, and as part of the proposal, this would change. So as you can see in this example, a residential property in the city with 2 households is going to pay $80.50 per household. This is less than their neighbouring property with a single household paying $161, even though all the services are both serviced by the Stormwater network. In the proposed change for stormwater, we would be changing from rating per property to rating per household. It would mean all households would pay the same rate for stormwater services. Both properties would pay $161 per household for the stormwater service. We would not be collecting any additional money because of this proposed change. Commercial and industrial properties would continue to be rated on capital value for stormwater. So currently, would be residential properties. So the city centre management and promotion rate, this rate is on the CBD, and it has been in place for approximately 20 years. And the way we manage the city centre and promote businesses in the Tairāwhiti area has changed. Currently, Trust Tairāwhiti provide the services for this rate. We have been discussing with Trust Tairāwhiti whether the current rate is fit for purpose, questioning if it's out of date. Does it still meet the needs of our businesses contributing? Is it static? There have been changes to the location and nature of businesses. The ideal rating method would need to be agile and capable of capturing businesses that benefit regardless of location. Is it targeted correctly? The activity does not benefit all contributors to the rate, and also may be benefiting some businesses outside the targeted rate area who do not contribute. To be sufficiently funded, Trust Tairāwhiti believe the rate provides insufficient funds to effectively achieve the objectives of this activity. The City Watch services, which currently support the CCTV crime prevention cameras, would continue to be supported by this rate. As we develop the long-term plan, we have an opportunity to consider Council's role in economic development, promotion and tourism, and new and improved ways to support and promote businesses in our region. While in every other rate that we've discussed so far, we're talking about reallocating services. In this instance, we're talking about removing the rate entirely.
So that's the presentation. If there's some more questions that you may have, then I will grab the microphone for you.
It's about the pan charges. I've got a house down the road here, and it's a 3-bedroom house that someone before my time put a door, wall in the door and turned it into a 1-bedroom flat and a 2-bedroom flat. And yet, I think since 1998, I've been paying double pan charges, double rubbish, double everything. And is that going to increase or is that going to stay the same? I mean, so there's one lady in one flat and one lady in the other flat. One lady works all the time and they would be using the water and the wastewater and the toilet less than a family of 5 with one toilet.
Yes, that would change in, if the proposal goes ahead. The rates would increase for,
Well, I'm already paying double on the back of the rates. Two toilet. Yeah.
and yes,
So it's going to increase again on top
yes,
of that?
it would increase because instead of one of the wastewater rates being per property, it would emerge with the pan rate and would be per toilet pan. So yes, it would increase. And it's the same with the stormwater. The stormwater would move from being per property and would also be per household or per dwelling. And you've got 2 dwellings.
What if I put the door back in and have a 1 tenancy agreement and turn it back into a house? Take a toilet out, it'll be 1 unit. It'll save me $30 a week in rates.
Yes, if you converted it back into 1 dwelling, then the rates would definitely reduce. It's because it's operating as 2 flats.
Yeah.
And if
The rates are already like 4,600 for a 110-year-old house, you know, it's sort of pretty up there.
Most of the, within the residential, even if it is a unit goes down by about $150. So if you add all the total of the rates, they should see a little bit of reduction of it. Yes, you will see you're paying a little bit more for the wastewater and stormwater. But because of the redistribution of the forestry roading rate coming back, you should see a reduction from there. But we can double check what your allocation is. Yeah. Well,
The one rate might increase, but overall you will probably see a reduction.
if you give us your address, we can check for you right now what the actual impact is on our.
Our last rates workshop.
It is. Yes, it is. Okay. But with it, not capturing it is definitely where it's gone on the Let's Talk rates, where if you're going onto the, even if you're going to the, thank you, the GDC website, it's actually quite prominent. It says Let's Talk rates. You just go click onto that and it will take you through to the area for the consultation. And there's a simple tool there that says, click on that. How do you calculate what minor rates are? It's a very easy to use tool that's on there. And also we can capture your individual submissions or anything here now. This captures the whole sort of community feedbacks as well.
So if you use that tool, it shows you with the proposed changes what your rates might look like, not taking into account new valuations that might come up later in the year.
Of our rates is made up on the back, for example, weed and pest control delivery. I understand it's a overall broad rating system, and I understand, you know, we've got to protect our borders from Hawke's Bay with TB and the likes, but I feel the team that's involved there, and I know individuals personally, and I've played rugby with them, but at the end of the day, it's not been a fair coverage of compliance within weed and pest. And the forestry seem to, and they own a lot of land around, seem to be able to just carry on as they have done without any compliance being imposed on them. But yet we, as pastoral farmers, have to live with their non-compliance with bird life and things like that coming and doing their business and spreading these weeds. There doesn't seem to be a comprehensive coverage of the area. I figure the forestry companies obviously pay for weed and pest as well. Yeah, so I just get concerned of the cost that's getting imposed on people who are trying to do the job properly, and the compliance that's imposed on us as pastoral farmers has been neglected in other areas of land use.
And we'll take that down as well. So part of the funding of how we do things, one is rates, but there is also other mechanisms of fees and charges and what is the appropriate amount. So if there is higher cost of monitoring that is charged for any of the resources that we have for our district, that's one way of capturing those. And if perhaps some areas don't do it as well as others, or they don't look after it, then there could be higher costs associated with those. So part of the long-term plan is to look at that and look at the funding of how we do things. And it's good to bring up sort of those things to actually see, okay, there's another option that we could be looking at in these different areas where people comply with it, they're good with the pests and plants, and then others not so much. So how do we actually get parity in some of those things? Yeah.
It's getting frustrating, to say the least. Is this the forum also? Look, pull me up if it's not. And you senior management must compare other areas, but dog registrations, unbelievable. The difference, what we get charged here. Dogs, for a working dog. What do we get for it? I'd like to ask that question. Yes, we have a animal control person in Toliga, and that's another story. But again, there's a lot of herd job that doesn't have to actually be happening now with the roading changing their option of wandering stock. But I'd just like to question what is happening, because within that, I understand what the cost to run the pound is. I can put my hand on my heart to say you haven't captured probably a third of the dogs in the district. So the compliant people, the honest ones, are subsidising the ones that aren't, and there's no scrutiny on how many dogs you've got, or anything like that. It's all on honesty.
Probably I haven't got Helen who'd be able to answer those sort of things, but if they're in the city, there is a sort of, you've got to have more consent if you've got 2 or 3 dogs for your neighbouring. So there are aspects of that. In terms of the dogs, as opposed to the pound, we'll take that separate, but what we collect from rates for that activity is 80% in rates from registration fees. 20% we say the general ratepayer will pay towards it, even if you don't have a dog. And that's to work out that some people don't all register their dogs, and therefore there's a public good, there's education around making sure that there is how to behave, what to do with things. So that is generally all ratepayers will contribute to the people that do have dogs. And so there's that public good component. Then you have to actually see that there are other costs that we actually have to pay for the national database that everybody has to comply with regards to rural or urban. And depending on the sort of the cost, which they can review, but I know in some other areas like perhaps Wairarapa, they've got the same sort of working dogs is about the same. It's about half of what you pay for the urban dogs as well. And that's about, it was 4 or 5 years ago, about $44. So I would imagine they would be increasing per year. So it's about comparable to what we have, but yours is other questions, which those kind of details we'll probably get back from the director in that area with Helen.
I'm just speculating now, but another council might put a bigger chunk of that overall charge on everyone, where we put a smaller charge, I think it's $23 or something like that, where another council, in order to bring down the fees for, say, working dogs, overall, they might be charging a bigger chunk from everyone to cover it. So it's just how it is allocated. Because the charge that we do for the dogs just cover the cost that we have associated with them at this stage. I know what you're saying about working dogs, because your working dogs just stay on the farm.
That hasn't been chipped or in town, there's only a one-way ticket to the vet. It shouldn't have to go through the pound system. And to me, those individuals probably, a lot of them don't actually collect their dogs, I understand, and they'll get another dog. So I think the rules should be toughened. They're family pets, and if they're family pets, they should be buying from the whole family who owns them. I understand the council gave a concession of late payment this year. Really, if you own a dog, you pay. I don't mind paying for an administration fee for a database, and I think that's good to know what's happening out there. But when I see all these dogs around the countryside that haven't got any connection to the council's records, that concerns me.
Yeah, and so do the things, probably the specifics you're asking, it's probably more, Helen as a director should be able to give you exactly what it is and how they're doing and what they have. I believe when we were talking about not having unregistered dogs, there was low compliance, very few in our area, which is because the actual team is pretty active on the ground with it. But again, to the other specifics, I can't answer. I'm not probably the right ones, but yeah.
What concerns me also is some of these high compliance costs and rates. When you say yes, it'll go up 2 or 3%, but you're starting from a higher base, and that's where we get out of proportion on the countryside.
I'm not sure. Comparable for, again, in the Wairarapa, they were going up 6 or 7%. So, which is only one place. But when we were looking at the range of it, it was a mix. But you're quite right. As they're part of the fees and charges when they review it, there's two elements. Is it what we call our revenue and financing? What are the rules of the funding of it? And what element do we consider that activity has a certain amount of public good? And this particular one for the dogs, it's considered that 20% is a public good, and then the rest of it, whatever the cost it is for administering and making sure we've got safety on our streets and looking after those dogs, we are required to get enough revenue from registrations to cover that. And so that's how those work. They're proportionate between the working dog and the city dogs in town is worked out on those kind of a basis, and who's a good owner, who's not so much of a good owner, and those kind of things. But certainly those fees and charges can be reviewed in terms of light. Again, one of our principles was all things we consider affordability, and that includes the funding of it. So they review and check, are we out of alignment with other councils? How does that work? And what should we be considering?
Is there any questions from the online? No. Well, that really does conclude this evening. Thank you for making the time to come and join us and for all your great questions and feedback, some of which we'll take on board to put through as requests for services for other members of the council. I'd still encourage you, if you haven't already, do jump onto the Let's Talk Rates website. There's a great repository there of information, including statement of proposal. We do have a couple printed out if you'd like to take those away. So that's a more comprehensive document which goes into the whole rating review and those other options that have been considered that Joe touched on with the forestry, for example. So you're welcome to take a copy of that away for bedtime reading as well. Also online, you have the ability to make a submission, or as I mentioned at the start of the evening, if you'd like to do one tonight before you leave, I do have a tablet here so I can guide you through that process, and your feedback and submissions would then go to the council workshop for consideration of these proposed rate changes. From here, in terms of a timeline, when would you expect to hear what's happened, the next step? We would be looking at pulling together all the submissions with hearings on the 3rd of November is the planned day. So if you'd like to speak to your feedback, we'd love to have you along again to speak to that at the hearing process. And then towards the end of the year, that's when there would be information posted on the council website as to what the decisions have been made. So you're welcome to stay for a cuppa,
Another
talk with
cuppa.
our lovely mayor, or if you wish to carry on with your evening, then haere and enjoy the rest of your night. And thank you once again for coming, both online and here. Thank you.
Second channel, channel 1+1. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Bye.